On tonight's episode of the Talkin TV podcast, continuing with our summer 2021 binge, our birth back to reality. We're having to keep it a little quiet for A Quiet Place Part 2, the long-awaited sequel. Literally to the point where John Krasinski even had to come on and do a PSA before the movie started, being like, guys, thank you. Just thank you for coming out to see my movie in a movie theater. All of that and more we will be covering tonight. Chris, you excited?
Yeah, man. All I have to say is don't knock over the cassettes.
Just don't knock over anything, really. All of that and more on tonight's episode of the Talkin TV podcast summer series. Stay tuned. God damn it, man. You know, we were literally, I feel like we were literally just here. I feel like we were literally just here on Friday having the discussion about the first movie, and I was literally saying, okay, just because there have been initial installments that I haven't been a fan of doesn't necessarily mean that there can be sequels that can impress me. And, you know, it's almost, you know, it's funny because I've constantly had this weird relationship with movies where I feel like I can read their minds, and I feel like I can I feel like I can sometimes say the lines and do the actions before they actually do. But this was the instance where the movie beat me, and I'm pissed, but at the same time I'm impressed at the same time. Like, what do you make of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I think we just need to get right into it and start off with our spoiler-free thoughts. So
yeah,
we're
not even waiting. We're not even doing the intro this time. Look, you guys know who we are. You know where we are. You guys have been on here before.
It's like 90 places on the screen. So yeah,
you guys know.
I just want to get into it.
It's kind of hard to miss.
I want to use your little segue there just to start off with my spoiler-free thoughts. So yeah, I really love the first one. If you guys didn't catch our Friday night stream, by no means was it my favorite film of 2018, but it was in the lower half of the top 10. Like, I liked it a lot. It was a great theater-going experience. The use of sound. Me as an audio guy, first of all, you guys need to understand, this movie is like sex for my ears, essentially. I knew you'd get a kick out of that,
bro.
One.
I've been waiting for you to make. I don't think you understand. I've been waiting for you to make a joke like that since we started this podcast, and the fact that you finally did it, I'm like, yes, let's go.
Yeah. I gotta be honest, because like, there's very few movies that really like titillate that sense of mine the way that this one does, and so I just need to.
Oh my god, there's so much libido here. I don't know what I'm gonna do.
When you can be both articulate, intelligent, and
profane at the same time.
Yeah. All right.
I love it.
Hey, that's what we do here on Talkin TV,
Get
right?
this podcast off to a banging start.
Oh no, F9 series.
You open the floodgates. You let the puns roll.
Jesus.
Now we're stuck here.
Yeah, no, but so I mean, first of all, I'm not saying I'm going to be a little biased towards this film because of the audio being so good, because there's a chance it could be terrible and fail. We've seen it in Bird Box, right? A similar premise where it's got a lot of quiet
I don't know what that was trying to do.
Of course, that's a different sense, right? We lose sight, but when you lose one sense, the others become stronger. It's just sort of like a common thing, and so, because of the use of sound in this movie, as someone who like is sitting in their studio right now as an audio engineer, it's brilliant and it's phenomenal. And I'm so glad I got to go to the theater to see this one. So it's already winning in that technical alone. But they shot this completely on 35 millimeter, and it shows. It has such a look. And it's like, wow, this is John Krasinski's second film? I mean, it's almost hard to believe he was an actor.
Fourth, technically, but...
Well, yeah, but I mean, as like the sole director franchise, and the lead creative voice, but and especially with this one being the sole writer and director, right? That's very impressive. And so it's just like I don't know, man, his grasp on the filmmaking process is far greater than I thought it was going to be in like such a short amount of time with such like a small resume, really, as like a director behind the lens. And it's just, so the technicals work, but also I think when it comes down to it, we simultaneously managed to keep the charm and to keep what made the first one so special and so unique, while also adding new elements that don't take away from that, but rather heighten it and keep it interesting, because it is a type of, I don't want to say gimmicky story, but it's a type of screenplay that can go sour if you don't add new things to it as you make new installments, just because of well, you could easily show your hand the first time around, right? Like I think back to that one scene where Emily Blunt's walking down the steps in the final act of the first movie, and there's that one rusty nail that's sticking up, and inevitably she's eventually going to step on it, and it's just, oh my god, it's in your head. And so they have some of those old elements in this one. My cassette joke, we won't do any spoilers, but there is a moment where one specific character has to crawl through a glass window and she might step on a cassette, and she doesn't, but she almost does, and it's that same sort of suspense. But there's other elements too in this one, right? Now they kind of go up head to head with the monsters, and so like we've kept the old, which is still very suspenseful because the filmmaking is so sound and strong, but we also introduce some new. So without like taking away too much and risking ruining a spoiler-free section, overall, I think that this movie was the perfect sequel in regards to staying true to the source material, but also elaborating and expounding upon this universe that if you like the first one, you're going to like it, I think. What about you, though? Where's your head at with all that?
It's honestly amazing because I literally said before that, like, I didn't know if Krasinski going behind the camera almost fully this time was going to make that much of a difference, right? And so... don't worry. Like, don't worry. I won't spoil anything yet for our Canadian friends in the north. Just so you know, again, my deepest condolences to your inability to still go to the movie theater. You know, but I think the most noticeable thing about this, you know, kind of getting into my spoiler-free thoughts that I noticed immediately, is the fact that this was, well, first off, besides having a much larger budget, it was the fact that this definitely, I feel like, took all the right lessons from the first one. As far as, because even though I wasn't the biggest fan of the first one, I still think it was amazingly technically profound. Like, I can't at all fault the technicals in that movie. If anything, the technicals were so precise that I thought it almost impeded on the logic of the plot, because my brain was literally going to places of like, okay, at what level of sound frequency do these things, like does it take for, like, to get these things to come near? So it's like, obviously we know shouting brings these things close, but like knocking over a lantern, like that does nothing, you know, like that's a pretty big noise as far as that goes, you know. So I think what this movie does is it expands upon the world, right? You get another sort of like adventure within this world that also leads to kind of like some form of resolution. Like, cause I think the biggest thing that I hated about the first one is the fact that it had that open ending where, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm like, how many times have we seen open endings that are building up for sequels that end up going nowhere? You know, like I said, we kind of got a little spoiled by the Marvel of it all, but how many times have we seen that? And I guess without kind of distracting, I guess the thing is that the first one I thought was so chock full of cliches and like characterizations that I personally was just not a fan of, that in a way I was almost surprised when this one like went fully with it, but like was able to like you said, expand upon it in ways that still felt refreshing and still felt like you could tell stories within this world, you know? Because by the time to put this in perspective, by the time the first one ended, I was like, okay, that's over with. Cool. Let's move on to the next thing, you know? And by the time this movie ended, I was like, oh shit, I'm locked in. I'm ready to go. I want to see what comes next, because I think the thing that this tells me, especially with Krasinski having much more soul control this time, is that he definitely knows what he's doing as far as the artistic lens with this franchise, right? I think he's finally found his muse in a way that certain previous projects weren't, right? I think he's been building towards this for the last couple of years, but I think he's finally hit it, and it makes sense now why he had so, in a way, almost so much more of an emotional stake in this one than he did the first one in a weird way. The first one, it was just a matter of like, okay, if this just works, cool. This time around, obviously, and again, this is where the pandemic kind of did him no favors, is, okay, this is like kind of my ticket to the big time as far as that goes, you know? And certain, obviously, theatrical things that have erupted because of the pandemic we'll get into later on in this podcast, but it definitely shows that, like, I feel like he was much more passionate this time around, and it just made those certain elements of the story that I thought didn't work the first time around, it just made them feel much, much more engaging this time around. And that's about as loose as I can go without, like, going into my specifics, because a lot of the points that I'm going to bring up in this podcast depend and hinge on the specifics of the plot. So again, fair warning, people, but if you have not seen the movie yet, roughly around this point is where I'd say to turn off the podcast, just so you know. But Chris, you have anything else to add there before we jump into spoilers? Because I really want to talk about this movie.
Yeah, no, the only thing I would say is I completely agree. It's definitely spoiler talk time. So if you guys have any spoiler-free thoughts, any sort of quick comments on anything Dom and I sort of vaguely elaborated on here in the beginning, let us know in the comments below. And of course, stick around, because if you were confused about anything specifically we were talking about, we are going to clear that up right now. So of course, please hit that subscribe button, turn on that bell so you never miss when we go live. And of course, give this video a like. Dom, what's our next topic?
Our next topic is this better than the first one? And I'll just clear up the air right now. Yeah, hell yeah. I think this is a much, much better movie than the first one. I think this movie focuses to me on all the elements that I thought the first one was going to, that it didn't. I thought that, I think that the characters and the tension are much more strung out in a more naturalistic way than the first one. I think my big problem with the first one is certain of the scenarios that were set up in order to draw out the tension felt very, very blatant. And it's like, okay, this feels kind of forced to the plot. It's like you said, the rusty nail thing, which means I'm like, okay, it's using the Pavlov's gun technique, but in the worst way possible, where I'm like, okay, of course she's going to step on the nail, you know? And the daughter being the teen angst characteristic. I'm like, first of all, just teen angst in post-apocalyptic stories just needs to go away because it never works and it always drags it down as far as that goes. And then, of course, that leads to, you know, Krasinski having to sacrifice himself near the end, you know? And, of course, the number one thing where I'm like, I'm sorry. I know, I get it. It doesn't make any sense at all, and I shouldn't be harping on this, but why? Why are they having babies in the apocalypse? Stop having babies in the apocalypse. You literally just had a kid that died. Like, in her defense,
she was pregnant prior.
She was?
Yeah, 9 months.
Okay, all right, sure, all right. You know what? Fine, all right. They get the pass there. But the point being is that the first one just had a lot of dumb moments and a lot of dumb cliches that I was like, okay, why are we doing this? You know, I'm like, this actually has the promise to be like something really cool. And why are we getting stuck in Clicheville here, right? But this time around, we don't have the mystery of the creatures, of like not knowing what the creatures are to hide behind. So this time we're just full on fighting them, right? And when they come out, unlike the first one, where it was kind of like, oh, look at the reveal, and then it's just kind of like some, you know, kind of just weird CG, like Demogorgon creature looking. This time, now that we know what they look like, and now that we have the expectation to play off of, they are scary. We see them slice and dice multiple people this time around, and we see that, like, even they do that brilliant thing that I love in these types of movies, right? And it's so hard to do, right, because of the jump scare element in general, which is where people think they're safe, and then they get killed, right? Because if we're talking about this, right, as far as kind of the horror element of it, right, I will say that I have been adamant up front and very, very vocal about my dislike of 90% of horror movie cliches, right? Except in one instance. There's one instance where I'm willing to forgive it, and that's in creature feature movies, like Alien, like Pitch Black, like those types of movies.
Cloverfield?
Cloverfield, exactly.
Yeah.
When it's a creature, go all out with the horror cliches, because unlike 90% of most serial killer movies, which is where it's just regular human beings, or in this case, supernatural figures that are invulnerable, therefore it takes away all the tension. But like 90% of horror movie franchises, it's just a regular dude or a supernatural figure, and I'm like, I don't care about that, you know? I'm like, I don't care about it. And also, it just kind of makes me laugh whenever it's like regular dudes that are like seemingly able to teleport from one location to the other. But whenever it's creatures, it gives a legitimate sense of fear to the stakes, right? Because, because creatures, in a way, like, they have that grounded sense of believability, because all creatures in film are modeled after some form of creature in real life, so therefore it gives it some form of grounding and believability, and it gives us that, like, kind of apex predator edge that where it's like, okay, you have now humans are not the dominant species, and now humans have to survive like they're part of the animal kingdom. And so in that sense, whenever you bring out, you know, the jump scares, the people thinking they're safe, you know, them coming around from any corner that you don't know about, I'm down with it. The other thing that this movie does brilliantly, that so many horror movies of this type don't do, it has it take place in the daytime, right? Because horror, for the longest time, has had this expectation. It's like, you gotta have it at night. The darker, the scarier, you know? And in this instance, it shows, no, these fucking alien creatures just mowing apart people in the middle of the day is just as fucking terrifying as it is at night. You know, if anything, it's more terrifying at night, because daytime, it's almost playing against your expectations, where you've been trained to think that, oh, daytime, they're safe, you know? Not here. It ups the tension in ways that I didn't think was possible, right? Literally to the point where it's like, I literally made this joke before, where it's like, all the talking parts of this movie, I would start to, like, kind of drift off and fall asleep during, and then an action sequence would come in. It would literally be like a defibrillator on my chest. I'd be like, oh, fuck, now I'm back in, because it would just come at the most unexpected parts, and I didn't even think it was still possible for these types of movies to do that. Like, play off of that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, to your first point about sort of like making these creature films and these sort of like beings with such rich lore effective, and for the most part them failing. I think that's why Hollywood, with a few different IPs withstanding, had a hard time doing vampires, because vampires are such strong supernatural entities. So I think, like, we have the satirical one that of course works, and I think like Buffy is kind of a different beast in and of itself. That's
Right.
really more of a soap opera. It's
Coming
more
of age story. Yeah.
It's more of like an Arrow CW style soap opera, just for like a different type of audience. And I think really that's why we've had such an issue with, like, that whole realm of things. And creature features, I think, because of the fact that the rules are kind of off a little bit, and I think the criticism is a little subdued for whatever reason why around these types of movies. For example, Cloverfield, and some of the other, like, Demogorgons and all these things, right? Like, people are just a little more lenient with the big creatures against humans, whereas with, like, the more intelligent creatures like vampires and werewolves and stuff, I just think the more human you are, the harder it is to execute. So I do think that it's great that Krasinski didn't, because if you notice in this film, the creatures are never in the foreground. They're always in the background. Like, the shots are, like, for example, when they're running through the Dharmaville, and you have Cillian Murphy's character sort of like realizing, like, oh no, that Coast Guard boat floated over here. We are done for. And he hears the rumbling of the creature sort of in like that drainage pipe, and he like runs up to the town and he starts screaming, run, get to safety. They're here. He's in the center of the frame, right? You have Dharmaville in the background and all of these people being attacked.
Wait, are you called the random village where they just set up like a bunch of houses Dharmaville?
Yeah, it looked exactly the same. It looked
I just had to make sure.
Same.
I had to make sure.
Yeah, shout out to my Lost fans. You know what I'm talking about. An island with a village that looks just like that. Krasinski was a fan.
I swear. Hollywood is messing with us. Like this is we're not pulling strings to make these references. Hollywood is blatantly fucking with us.
I swear to God, everything is lost.
Which is funny because there was a movie that was made called All Is Lost with Robert Redford. So I think that's hilarious that you say that.
Wow, so it's going back a long time.
It really is. Well, the meaning is still there. The deeper meaning. There's a deeper meaning in everything.
I just didn't know what to call it, so I'm just calling it Dharmaville.
I love it.
So because of the fact that the creatures are always in the background and our characters are in the foreground, we don't have to critique it in the same way that we would a Cloverfield, and so we can be, I think, actual critics around this movie, which makes it so special, because we're focusing on a character's emotional response rather than carnage of the Cloverfield monsters ripping apart New York City and crushing thousands of people with falling buildings. It's different in the sense. It's a different kind of creature feature. I'd say it's a more mature and nuanced creature feature, and I wouldn't even call it a creature feature. This was going to be my
that's not
point.
That's not the word I would use to describe it.
I wanted, there are creatures in it, and I wanted to sort of expound upon what you said, because I feel like we can talk about it that way, but I wanted to come into this a completely different angle. I think this is no longer a horror franchise.
I agree.
This has turned into a thriller action suspense franchise.
Yes, and that's actually what I wanted to get at, because what I saw with this movie in ways that I did not enjoy about the first one is this is the first time I've seen this type of story since Jurassic Park, where you have kind of the action like coming from around the corner elements, but because you know the creatures that you're dealing with, it creates for a whole different sort of thrill. It doesn't take away from the kills when they happen. If anything, it makes them that much more heart-wrenching and that much more emotionally sound, when it happens. But I totally agree with you. I could not agree with you more on that sense.
Because I think the horror is what the first movie is, right? It's like we don't see the creature until the third act, and then we finally see it, and now we're face to face, and how will they survive? And once you kind of lose that, if Krasinski would have played into it again, I think that this would have been a real piss poor second movie. Yeah. And so his ability to have the foresight to see that and change sort of the angle of the type of storytelling of these characters, making it more of a survival sort of thriller action film rather than like a horror sort of we need to be hush hush and we can't, the killer can't find us type of thing, right? Essentially rooted in those old horror traditions was the first one, whereas this one is like I really, we went to the movie with the Cerulli twins, and one of them said it's like that Jurassic Park Velociraptor scene, and that's so true. That's not a horror film. Definitely very,
but it has a lot of horror elements in it, though, and that's part of what makes that first Jurassic Park. And real quick, I just wanted to say that, like, what you're describing right now, and I think we just realized, like, what it is, the code that Krasinski cracked, that so many people who do sequels in Hollywood cannot seem to figure out, which is that You're right. He shifted the genre. And I have not seen that happen since the Aliens release, when James Cameron took over from Ridley Scott and took the traditionalist horror movie of that movie and turned it into more of an action thriller. Like,
right.
We saw
Alien
Cameron
is
do
a
it.
Great example.
We saw, but more than that, we saw Cameron do that exact same thing in the 80s as well, before and after Aliens, with the first two Terminator movies. The first Terminator, for all intents and purposes, it's a pursuit horror film. We just happen to be following the villain as the main character, which at that point had never been seen before in Hollywood, and still in a weird way has not been seen. And then Terminator 2 is just this blown up gonzo action franchise. And Krasinski, I can't believe it took us 30 years for somebody to figure that out, but Krasinski finally figured that out. Do a straight up horror movie first, then make it more of an action thriller second.
Do you know why you can compare these to those classic, legendary Hollywood
Tell me
IPs?
why.
It's because they are rooted in core fundamental sound filmmaking, first of all. And second of all, it's because these filmmakers had the foresight to realize that the horror at first was understanding what this never before seen concept was. Like, I know people have played with sound in movies, and I know we had silent films before we had the talkies, but the thing is, we haven't really done sound like this with suspense ever to this level. Yeah. I mean, you've seen more movies than I have. I don't know if I've ever heard of this being so effective on this level. And that's the horror of the first one, is those moments of silence where you feel the breath come out of you because, oh my God, I'm hearing only myself in the theater right now. And the crumpling bags of popcorn after such an intense sequence. What is happening?
I'll tell you exactly why.
But that goes away if you make 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 movies.
Right. I'll tell you exactly why that is. Just as far as like the technical principle, it's because when you have a horror sequence, right, with a jump scare, right, where the sound turns all the way down and then the creature pops out, what's more terrifying? And you know the answer: the imagery or the sound?
The sound.
Not 10 out of 10 times, it is the sound. Exactly. Where it is, if you turn off the sound for those sequences, the scene becomes infinitely less scary, right? It's the sound that creates the fear, right? Because the sound in and of itself is the thing that you don't see. So therefore, it makes it that much more terrifying because you're seeing the imagery, right? So your brain is already anticipating what's going to come next. But the sound, no matter how much you prepare yourself for it, is always the part that comes out of nowhere. And the fact that Krasinski has single-handedly managed to, well, not single-handedly with the first one, but you guys know what I mean, has managed to make a movie that relies entirely on lack of sound. It creates for like a whole new form of tension as far as that goes, and I feel like he's able to utilize it so much more in this instance, playing off of the action sensibilities rather than the straight horror sensibilities. I think I'm also figuring out why I had more of a problem with it in the first one, because the first one, even though you had the brilliant sound to play off of, you still had a lot of the traditionalist horror sensibilities, which I wasn't a fan of, and because we didn't know what the creatures looked like, I didn't have that sense of really suspense to play with, other than just a sense of, oh, they just have to be quiet, okay. But this time around, now that we have the creatures as the visible antagonist, it just ups it like the fear factor, if you will, to like up to here.
It really does. And you know, even though that didn't bother me in the first one, not seeing them, I can see that critique, and so that's why I do think that the second one is a stronger movie, just fundamentally speaking, although I did enjoy the first one more. But either way, before we get too far away from the whole comment and critique on the sound, it goes back to the first thing you learn in film school, or one of the first things, rather, depending on where you studied. It's show, don't tell, right?
Right.
And so he finds a way to deliver show, don't tell with the sense you can't physically see. It's sound. You hear it.
Yes.
And he finds a way to do that in the first movie, but then he also understands it's only going to be special one time.
Yes.
And he keeps it going. And we more explore the humanity in this next one. And we sort of explore the way that this alien species has impacted the world and how that's changed people. And it becomes similar to your apocalyptic sort of Walking Dead type journey, but then it's still uniquely its own because he never gets too far away from what makes the first one special. In fact, they expound upon it. Now sort of we know how to kill the beasts, and we're still playing with sound, but we're playing with sound in a different way. We're focusing on frequencies now, and there's sort of like a high-pitched, almost like dog whistle frequency that they figure out, and they're learning how to harness it. And it's interesting. They keep it.
It is.
They keep it going, but I just think it's wrong to call it a horror film. Although obviously it's going to be a horror film. I get it.
In order to kind of just expand upon that before we move on to the next topic, because there's a lot still that I feel like we got to cover in the next couple topics. I think the other element that I feel like not enough people are talking about, as far as what I feel made the a lot of people, words, gravitate towards the first movie and towards this one, even if, and this is what's kind of baffling me, is the fact that the second one is getting a lot of like negative reviews overall, which I'm just like, did you watch the same movie as us? Because I'm like, this is doing everything that good sequels used to do, at least before we got bogged down in the sensibility that every sequel just has to be just more of the same of the first movie. I don't know when people settled for that, but somewhere in the,
when you change things up,
they really do, and I don't know where that happened, because how many top 10 lists have you seen of the same 5 or 6 amazing sequels, and every single one of those sequels changed something that was fundamentally known about the first one, and it's just every sequel now just wants to do more of the same thing of the first one. I don't get it. Ultimately, I feel like the most recent sequel that we've gotten that actually changed things up was the second Guardians of the Galaxy movie, and in a way also the second Captain America movie, because I think the Captain America movies have done a good job of changing up the tone of each movie, but even still, those still like maintain core elements of the first one, you know. And this is the first sequel that I've seen in a long time that actually changes it, because in addition to sound, it utilizes fundamentals of filmmaking. Just filmmaking. The opening sequence, very, very similar to the opening sequence of the first one, which I said is my absolute favorite part of that movie, is that it utilizes simple, like minimalistic action and movements to build up tension and build up suspense to the inevitable Big Bang. It's the Hitchcock tension counter all over again, you know. Place a bomb under a table of a family eating dinner, right? They don't know about it. The bomb goes off. It's unexpected, but it's a brief moment, and then it's over. You tell the people who are watching that there's a bomb under the table, but they can't communicate it to the family. The tension is increased and stretched to the tune of a thin wire. That's exactly what he does with this opening sequence, you know, where it's just him, like they're celebrating, you know, like a baseball game. It's like a, you know, typical small town gathering. There's people watching TV in the background, you know. All of a sudden, they see something coming out of the sky. The creatures start attacking. They build up immediately, like how it is that the creatures detected. They do it brilliantly as far as the subliminal aspect, and all of that is done with simplistic filmmaking, and I think that it continues throughout the rest of the film.
Yeah, I agree. So with that being said, do you want to jump into our next segment?
Yes, but first thing, yeah. So for you, like this movie, ultimately, you say it's a better film, but you still enjoy the first one more. Just so I get that right.
I think it's a better film technically, and obviously sonically. As an audio engineer, it's hard for me to not make the first one better, but that's not the reason why I think the first one's better, even with my just sort of like audio understanding and slight bias. It's because I think the characters were, while more fleshed out in this one, the only thing that I think may have slightly suffered was the distribution of the roles.
Yeah. I can understand that.
To be more specific, one Emily Blunt, which I might want to get to in a later segment. We might have to cover the performances depending on how time goes. Yeah. So that's the only reason why, because I think we'll get into that's going to have to be a later segment.
Actually, that's the thing, right? Because we're technically talking about how this film compares to the first one, so I'd say just talk about it now. Like, what is it about, like Emily?
And let's keep this one rolling.
So, keep this one rolling then. Yeah.
I think we had something very interesting in this film with the whole, oxygen container and the child and keeping him alive in the basket and figuring out a way to raise a child in the apocalypse. And so I think as a mother, her character is incredibly brilliant and incredibly smart and resourceful, and clearly is like the mother that you want to see in Hollywood and what we know mothers to be, sort of caring and self-sacrificing. But the problem is all of that exposition, all of those realizations happen in between the first and second movie off screen, really. And it's strange to say because we literally pick up right where we left off from the first one, but yet we don't see this. We don't, we have the oxygen container in the first one, but we don't see how they really have been getting by for so long. And it's because I think the first one doesn't really give you as much of that since the baby was pretty much just born, and it's just something about it feels left out, even though we pick up right where we left off in regards to her character. Like, I think I would feel more close to her, feeling sad about her daughter going off and, nervous for her daughter going off and sort of picking up the mantle of her father had I had more time with them post Krasinski's death. It just feels very rushed in regards to like getting into what's happening in this movie. Like we lost some of like the maternal understanding that we would need from her.
Right.
But then again, everyone else's performance is dynamite. It's just strange to me to see that the Stars plot line was sort of left in the dust, right? She's top billing in this one, and yet Cillian Murphy, his character, is so brilliant, so incredible.
Yes.
Great addition. The two kids, the boy and the girl, the older one.
So much better than, I mean, I never had a problem with Noah Jupe, but the daughter, particularly the Millicent Simmonds character, as she's coming into her own, as she's getting a little older, dynamite. She's so much better. So absolutely. She's the star. She is the main character of this movie. She takes over from Krasinski in a way that feels naturalistic.
100%. But before I pass it off to you, I just I couldn't get over while watching it how underwritten Emily Blunt was.
Yeah.
She's not villain.
Yeah. I will definitely say that is a problem that I not only share with this one, but also with the first one, where I'll admit, yes, the maternal aspects, I'll say were probably the weakest element, but I guess the reason why it didn't bother me this time around is because I also didn't necessarily get that sense from the first one either, because so much of the first movie was about Krasinski bonding with the kids respectively, you know, taking the son to the waterfall and then arguing with the daughter about, you know, the daughter going through her teen angst, whatever, and then almost getting the whole family killed in the first one, you know, because that's always the inevitable thing that happens in these movies, and it's kind of part of the reason why I wasn't a fan of the daughter in the first one, right? So I guess in a sense of like kind of not getting, I don't know. It's really weird because, like, yes, I agree with you fundamentally that Emily Blunt does not have as much to do with these movies. And the fact that the majority of her arc in these films consists of, specifically in this movie, consisted of, just going back to their old house and getting some things and then coming back and saving the son from the creature, you know? And then that's the entirety of her arc in this movie versus Millicent Simmonds and Cillian Murphy get the much richer, much juicier arc because they're the ones that get to go on the quest, you know, in order to potentially save humanity. They're the ones that run into all the obstacles along the way. They're the ones that run into the people, which, by the way, those people that just came out of nowhere, I'm like, I get it, like, you know, minimalism as far as that goes, but still, like, I hope that that's something more we get into as far as potential sequels go. So, as far as that goes, I'm not going to disagree with you on the Emily Blunt front, like, at all. I'll definitely say that of all the characters in both of these movies, I'll say she's the one that has the least amount to do as far as kind of focusing on the whole maternal aspect of everything. But I'll say that it's not necessarily something that bothers me per se. I will say it's her playing against type because we kind of have this mantra in her head of her being like kind of the action-based heroine, and so having her not have as much to do in these movies, especially since the last movie quite literally ended with her cocking a gun, you know, as far as like kind of solidifying what her role was going to be. It's definitely, I think, a flip and a switch and a little bit of a 180, but I'll definitely say that like it's not enough for me that's going to like serve as like a real detriment to this movie, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's not a detriment. It's just it was a bit alarming and something I couldn't help but notice.
Right.
But really, the last thing I'll say is I don't think it's a strike against any of the actors. I thought all of their performances were dynamite. I think it falls into the script because I think Noah Jupe, his whole thing of when Emily Blunt goes out to forage and get, you know, some more oxygen for her baby and to get wounds because obviously he's going to get infected and we can't have him stay like that. Noah Jupe's character, that is. That at least makes sense. There's a reason for her to venture out and put herself at risk. Him leaving his little baby brother to go upstairs and explore where Cillian Murphy said that his wife died, just to look around, I don't know. And to get scared when he saw a dead body. After all the dead bodies, it just kind of seemed like he needed a purpose and a role in the movie.
It definitely felt like... It definitely felt like
a way to destroy their safe chamber. But the thing is, I wasn't mad at him because his performance was incredible. I believed every second that he was hurt, that he was injured, and that he was just a kid. I just think the writing, if there's anything Krasinski suffers for in this movie, it's a little bit of the B storyline.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
First of all, why is Emily Blunt the B storyline?
Right.
Anyways, it is a little bit of the B storyline.
Yeah, it is. No, without question. Like Millicent Simmonds and Cillian Murphy are the A storyline. Emily Blunt and Noah Jupe are the B storyline. Like no question. And like I said, Noah Jupe continuing his track record from Honey Boy, man. Like he's going places as far as that goes. I've been really impressed with that kid. Also, just like again, just like the minimalism in a way that like I didn't really notice the first time around. You know, like when he gets that bear claw trapped around his foot, I'm like, God damn, I feel that. You know, it's just again just playing into everything that we were talking about as far as, you know, the silence picking up and really, you know, them playing around with it in new and different ways from the first one. So we want to move on to the next segment?
Yeah. Let's just definitively answer this. So
yes.
Dom, was the Quiet Place Part 2 better or worse than the first one?
You know, without question. Like, I'm not going to sound like a broken record here. I made my thoughts on the first one clear. I thought it was technically sound and brilliant, but this one just improved on it in every single way possible. It was more fun. It was more engaging. It was more thrilling. It was more daring. I liked a majority of the character stuff more, and it just made me more interested to explore this world in a way that the first one just didn't. So, absolutely, I think this was 100% a better movie than the first one.
I think that if the only things that were better about the first one were the writing and the specifically each character just feeling a little more purposeful, I think it's only because we have to get bigger in a sequel, and I'm not going to fault it for that. I just think that if there was one thing, like I previously just said, Krasinski suffered on, it was sort of the balancing act of the characters. But still, I do think the second one was better overall, because how could this last 15 minutes not sort of hearing what you had to say about it and sort of really further realizing my thoughts, change my mind on that.
Right.
But anyways, what did you guys think? Was it better or worse than the first one? Let us know in the comments below. Of course, subscribe, hit that like button, and smash that notification bell. But don't break it, because you're going to want to have it intact. So you're going to
need it. You're going to need it. That way you know whenever we go live. So Chris, we're talking about the theatrical window now, right?
I think we are.
Yeah, because it's funny because we've been talking a lot about the future of this franchise, right? We'll talk about that afterwards as far as that goes, but I feel like we got to talk about this first. We got to bring in the behind the scenes business of this all, because again, we talked a lot, and Krasinski has talked a lot about how he felt more than a lot of the other movies, right? Because that's the whole big thing about 2021 just in general, is that 2021 is essentially all the movies that were not released in 2020 because of the pandemic, mixed with a few of the 2021 movies. But it's almost like Hollywood literally had to shift its release date schedule back. But the other thing that has happened because of the pandemic is the big studios starting up all their streaming platforms, and then the ones that didn't have their own streaming platforms making deals with the current existing streaming platforms in order to basically rush everything to streaming. And as we've talked about many times before on this channel, the rush to get everything on streaming is impacting a lot of ways that everyone in Hollywood, not just the big higher-ups that we all hate, that consistently make decisions that consistently ruin the movies that we enjoy, that affects every working person in Hollywood's ability to make money, specifically a lot of money in this industry. And one of the ways in which this movie was both a success but also a little bit worrisome as far as everything goes is Paramount debuting Paramount Plus this year and shortening the theatrical window for all of their movies from 90 days, typically, which was the traditional 3 months that a movie would have to run in theaters and make its money before going to DVD, shifting down to 45 days before it debuts on Paramount Plus. What is that in comparison? That's not even a month and a half. Not even a month and a half before this movie debuts on streaming. And I think that does a lot of things. Number one, obviously, it just decreases the urgency that people feel to see it in theaters, right? Now, I understand why. It's more so, I think, for the global audience, more so for them than for the American, because even though in America things are starting to pick up again, globally there are still places that are shut down and just still do not have theaters open right now. So I can understand that from that sense, but the problem is that it starts to impact kind of the pay structure, and it starts to impact kind of the urgency that people have to see these movies, right? Because again, a big part of a movie's success in theaters is the ability, the urgency. You know, you got to see this movie now in the moment, because otherwise you might get spoiled, and you might get it spoiled for you, and then you won't be kind of like as in on the, like the hyper water cooler moment, right? That's kind of propelled movies for so long. And it's what we talked about a lot during the pandemic, as far as if streaming is the future of everything, it takes away from, to me, the overall, not quality, but the overall kind of importance of media, because if you can just watch it whenever you want, it's like it's the same thing. It's like, how many new movies came out on streaming last year that is like, oh, it's on streaming, I can catch it whenever. The urgency to watch it just decreases immediately, right? So that's just as far as the impending psychological impacts on the human psyche, but more than anything else is the business aspect, because Chris, I mean, you're able to break it down so much more specifically, but how does this affect Krasinski and Emily? How does this move affect Krasinski and Emily Blunt's want and need to do future of these movies?
Well, first, let me just speak to your point of the theatrical window and its effect on audience goers. I think the play here was twofold by Paramount. I think it was to drive traction to their streaming service, clearly.
Absolutely.
But I also think it was, hey, can we maybe increase the amount of money in a smaller period and be able to pump out more movies over the course of time? Because what if this movie makes the same amount of money that they projected in a 45-day window, as it would have in the 90-day window. Then they now realize if we force people to get out there and give them even less time, they're going to fork over their cash quicker, which could allow us to fund and get other projects out quicker so we can turn out more faster. That could be a thought process there.
Yeah, it certainly is. And it's a gamble. It could work.
It is a gamble because traditionally speaking, we have been so attuned to a certain system, and we have how many billion-dollar movies now? It seems like each year that list keeps growing. I think it's like 48
it's a lot.
or 53 or something, and that's like a lot of money for one industry to make. And so it's like, do you really want to mess with that? You know, because for however many billion-dollar movies, we have probably hundreds of 600 million, 400, 500 million-dollar movies, which is a solid amount of money for a movie to make. It doesn't have to be $1 billion to be a success. We got to remember that, right? And so I think that could be the approach by Paramount. But where it gets tricky, speaking about the John Krasinski and Emily Blunt situation, it is not a breach of contract because Paramount, at least from what I've read and understood, and a lot of my information comes from Collider, they seem to be pretty strong about getting like the legal aspects about this locked in place. Their articles I thought were pretty coherent and easy to follow. So if you guys want to double check what I'm learning about, just look that up. Just love to throw those sources out there when we talk about this type of stuff. But they essentially had a deal that was predicated, as do most filmmakers, on bonuses over how well the movie performs throughout those 90 days. So sort of like different marks. Like if you hit this much money at day 34, you're going to get an additional $5 million directly into your account. If you hit this much money at day 52, you're going to get this much, you know? So there's kind of like incentives to keep pushing the film and promoting it on their socials, and the marketing companies to keep pushing it out. Like it's a way to keep the team promoting something that is becoming more stale in the public eye, but is still performing well. It's kind of just a way to keep you working till the very last second, until the final day that your job's over, essentially. Like the movie process doesn't end until it's out of theaters. And, you know, the marketing team just happens to be like the last step in that. And in my opinion, at least, because they have to creatively get your butt in a seat how many different movies are coming out, right? And so with that being said, I think it hurts them because it creates distrust. It's kind of like what Warner Brothers was doing for so long, and I don't want to get too off kilter, so I'll just throw a quick example in. Warner Brothers recently signed a first look deal with Robert Pattinson for, I think, either 5 or 10 years. Now, a first look deal just means, hey, whatever you write, you got to show it to us first, and if we like it, we'll potentially pick it up and produce it. But if we don't like it, you have freedom to go and shop it around elsewhere. And he probably got a little bit of money just for like that first look to put. And I heard I forget who, but someone was really breaking it down and explaining it, saying this could just be a way to put a little money in Pattinson's pocket and sort of maybe get the word out, the rumor mill turning, like, oh, Warner Brothers is kind of starting to listen to the actors again, the artists, the creators again, because for the longest time they haven't been. So I think, well, as Warner Brothers seems to be making amends, this move by Paramount seems to be the first step, and hopefully not a sequence of steps that leads down to them being a Warner Brothers, where they're looked at as like a place where no one wants to go, right? Like, who said they didn't want to work with Warner Brothers this year? Well, Danny Villeneuve, Chris Nolan, there's probably
even
a few others.
Even Zack Snyder, after he said though, after how dirty he was done by
J.J. Abrams. Yep. I mean, the list goes on, and it's like, you give me 5 more minutes, I'll come up with like 30 more directors, right?
Right.
It's not a good look to have.
It's not at all.
I think this is an equally not as good of a look, especially with how successful and well received this second movie has been. And even if the reviews are mixed, which you said they were earlier, I've only seen glowing reviews.
It's still confusing to me. It's mostly just within my circles. A lot of people within my circles have not been a fan of it. The best reviews that I've heard are the ones that say the opening sequence is great and the rest of the movie is mediocre, which again, I that in that sense, if we're talking about the first movie, I'm like, yeah, I get it. But this one, I'm like, I don't get that at all.
Sure. Either way, it's still glowing. It was trending on Google when I looked it up yesterday. In the entertainment side of things, like, it is making an impact, and it's just kind of just not good form. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, yes, it was apparently legal, because otherwise we'd be hearing about a lawsuit from Krasinski and Blunt against Paramount for sort of voiding their contract. But it's just one of those things that you kind of just don't do, especially when a contract, and this just comes down to the morality of it, but this is how I see it and how I would conduct my business. you signed it before the pandemic. You signed it before
Right.
the most unique circumstance of our lifetime came
Right.
into play. And how are you not going to honor that?
Right.
And it just, what does that say going forward? Because if anyone, I think, is going to hurt there being a third, as we've heard Krasinski, sort of hinting that this could be a trilogy, if not go farther, it's going to be them cutting into the money. And ultimately, as Krasinski's a director, writer, and producer of this thing, can he get Michael Bay to shelve out more money to help him, make this film again? Can he put more of his own money in?
If there was anybody that he could get to shell out money, it would be Michael Bay, but...
Right, but if because this movie is going to be seen as a success.
Right.
But the people who created it might get diminishing returns because their incentives are going to be cut.
Right.
So how are they going to make another one if they didn't make money back on a success? It's very strange.
Yeah. It's a tricky situation because I think that, again, it's funny because I think that kind of all the worry that we had about that situation is going to go out the window because just based on, again, I can't say this for sure because, again, I don't know how numbers work. I don't know as far as, like, how tracking numbers, especially now in this crazy time with streaming and everything and just getting people out to go to the theaters, right? I can go based off one thing from what I hear with my group of friends, but that doesn't apply to everyone else, So it's very strange, but I'm hoping against hope that this does do within the 45-day window what it would have done in the 90-day theatrical window, but again, that's entirely going to depend on the global box office. But what this tells me is the fact of it's more of the rush to streaming during the pandemic when nobody knew what the fuck was going to happen next, just coming back and starting to bite the artists more, which again is something that we talked about, but something that we knew was going to happen, which is where Krasinski, right? And Emily Blunt signed that contract assuming that they were going to get the money in bonuses from this movie based on that it would do well within a traditional window so that they could use that money to fund the third one and continue to do it from this place of passion. But this changes everything because while this was intended by all intents and purposes to be a theater-going movie, and this is not like a movie that comes out in theaters that like you could have just easily dropped on streaming. No, you need to see this in a theater in order to get the full effect of it, right? That's the whole thing. That's the whole thing that Krasinski was saying throughout the pandemic and why he felt like he was getting screwed because this is a movie that he wanted to debut in theaters. It's just more of like kind of the continuing idea of streaming coming to dominate and continuing to add to the disposability of media and movies in general, and movie theaters trying to make a comeback but having all these new obstacles to overcome. It's disheartening to hear again because, again, even though we love movies and watch them in any sort of capacity, and streaming certainly makes it easier to watch them, it makes it more disposable, And at the end of the day, we want to see this shit in theaters, And in a weird way, I know that, again, this is going to go against what the great Scorsese said, but in a way, I thought the pandemic actually was, again, horrific in every single sense, except for the sense that I thought it was going to force Hollywood to seriously reconsider the types of media that it was putting in theaters, because a lot of what we were getting in theaters was spectacle-based garbage. But this is spectacle done right, because it's spectacle based on elements of filmmaking, not spectacle for spectacle's sake. In that sense, I still have hope as far as the types of movies and the quality and caliber of movies that we're going to get in theaters, right? Because now that we have streaming as this alternative option, there really should be no excuse going forward that the majority of movies that we get in theaters should be generic or boring or mediocre. But at the same time, if these contracts behind the scenes continue to impede on artists' ability to make money in the traditionalist sense, and if streaming is the only way to go in order to continue to make money, it creates this weird conundrum that, like, I don't know where we go from here,
No, I totally agree. It's the whole HBO thing where now they're rolling it back and saying, hey, 2021 is going to be the only year we do this. It's in theaters at the same time it is on HBO
Which I think is stupid, because that strategy was working for them. Because there were people that were watching them on HBO Max. HBO Max was getting subscribers, and there were people that were watching in theaters. Godzilla vs. Kong is the highest grossing movie of the year so far. So I don't know why they're doing that as far as that goes. That was just stupid, It
just shows the confusion and the desperation. Rather, whereas I think if they would have just sort of sat back and waited a little longer and just really tried to understand the situation a little better, they wouldn't have put themselves in every studio has kind of done it outside of the streaming titans whose model was set in stone and has benefited, after the pandemic. Netflix, Apple, and Amazon specifically are the only ones that really don't seem to be sweating right now.
Right. And Hulu as well. I'll throw Hulu in that mix, and Disney Plus as well.
True. Yeah, all those players. But the studios that are kind of still in the older, half in the old, half in the new, they seem to have made some pretty rash decisions. And this just seems to be another one of those dominoes that's fallen. But so the last thing I'll say before we jump out of this segment is, do I think even if that Krasinski loses some money on this one, do I think he's going to have a chip on his shoulder? Yes. But do I think he's still going to make a third? Yeah, it's his baby.
Absolutely.
I think he will still turn a profit. I do think there'll always be that sourness in his mouth, because I kind of did see this movie with how amazing it was. I mean, hell, I might have even went and saw it twice, and I think they lose that, right? They lose that down the stretch. People need plans on a Friday night. Let's go see A Quiet Place again. Or, they lose that, and they lose their incentive pay. But I do think he probably got a decent amount up front, because the first one was a smash hit, and it was so cheap to make, and they made their money back on it. So I think I think we can jump into our future of the franchise segment if you want, but I think the money's not going to hold it back from there being more.
The only thing that I really wanted to add to that is, again, movies traditionally that have done really, really well in theaters are movies that obviously build off of repeat viewings, not movies that people see everything opening weekend and then they don't see it again, right? The other thing that I have to keep in mind to add to your points about the first Quiet Place is the fact that, besides the fact that it was super cheap, it's the fact that it was a cheap original idea that made money in theaters, which, again, when was the last time that happened? I literally am struggling hard to think of it. That wasn't based off of a pre-existing IP or a real-life person. Like, I legitimately can't think of one. That's the other thing to keep in mind. And the only other example that I think is an example of a studio handling the situation for the pandemic in the right way, right, that didn't already have their own streaming service that everyone was going to go for, is what Sony did, which was where Sony signed that I don't remember the exact terminology of the agreement, so people in the comments will have to correct me on this, is they signed the first look deal with Netflix, where they have the what's called the however many day theatrical window that they have set up, and then their movies, right, and then their movies
Disney,
right, and then it goes to Disney, but then certain of their movies also go to Netflix as well.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Which I think is
Netflix, and then the back half, it's like a way to like just make the rounds.
Right, which I think is the smartest call, because Sony, for of all the studios that were like churning out these franchises of the last decade, Sony was definitely having the hardest time, where they had like 4 to 5 different things that they tried to turn into franchise, and then through weird circumstances or just diminishing returns on each one of them, they all kind of crashed and burned. Like, they tried to bring back Men in Black twice, that failed. None of the stars or talent wanted to come back after the second 22 Jump Street, so that failed. Ghostbusters was a complete failure. The only way in which they really succeeded was with those Lego movies, and even that kind of turned out weird, because literally they don't take animated movies as seriously as they do with the live action movies. So I think that this is the best case scenario, because just look at the Mitchells versus the Machines. The Mitchells versus the Machines, like, if they tried to like create their own streaming service, nobody would have watched that, but that movie is actually seeing like a little bit of success because it was such a smash hit on Netflix. I think it's still in like the Netflix top 10. So I think that's the way to go as far as kind of managing to still have your movies be relevant and hit that theater going window, and then like making sure that they're still seen on streaming as well. Because there's been this is obviously a topic for a future podcast, but the biggest thing that I heard from the first half of the year, when it wasn't like a WandaVision or a Falcon and Winter Soldier that everyone was watching, there was a lot of confusion as far as where to find certain things on streaming services, as far as like the kind of the rights deal goes, because unfortunately, still, a lot of people do not realize that if you just look up a movie on Google, it will tell you what streaming service it is on, if it is on a streaming service, literally right there. So that's really the only last thing that I had to add to as far as the whole, as far as the whole theatrical window and everything topic of this segment. But I did want to talk about the future of the franchise a bit, but let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Again, we did a little bit more of business in that segment, but let us know your thoughts as far as, kind of more of the business side. Let us know your thoughts as far as how you think it's going to affect some of your favorite things going forward. Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Be sure to click the subscribe button and the bell next to it. That way you get notified every time we put up new content, and follow us on our socials at Talkin TV Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. Now, Chris, the future of this franchise, right? It's safe to say that I'm a lot more invested and a lot more engaged in the future of this franchise than I was after the first one. But I think the first thing that's noticeable to me immediately, like I said, we talked about the genre shift, and we talked about like kind of the different focus on characters, is I think that with the third one, this has the potential to be the new Mad Max trilogy. And what I mean by that is it has the potential to do that thing that so little of the time happens in movies, and it is a thing that has mostly been relegated to TV, which I think is disappointing, because I think it's such a great story narrative telling device for movies, which is where you follow the same set of characters as they go from different location to different location to different location, and get to know all the different elements of the world, right? It's what made the Mad Max trilogy so engaging, because like the interesting thing about the Mad Max trilogy is Mad Max this is what a lot of people forget about, right? Because most people's idea of that comes from the second movie, The Road Warrior, which takes place after the start of the apocalypse. But the first Mad Max, which was shot on a shoestring budget, by the way, was takes place like while the apocalypse is still happening. So there's still some semblance of society left over. Then you get to the second one, right? And you fully get like the immersion into the apocalypse. So you kind of get to know like kind of how society has devolved or evolved in some senses. And then you get the third one, right? Which is kind of weird because that was the only really Americanized one. You get like the Thunderdome with Tina Turner and everything. And that one's more like kind of exploitation stuff. But like and then you get like Fury Road, which is just kind of in its, in a universe of itself. But like, we haven't had a movie franchise in a long time that has really done this. And this second one, to me, proved more than anything else that this franchise can actually go in those sorts of directions that if really, again, movies just in general have not been able to go to in a long time. So, like, let me know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think we've kind of seen the groundwork being laid that Krasinski understands this property in and out, and even with some minor plot issues, I still think, again, this was a really strong second outing because of the huge tonal shift, and I think the much needed tonal shift, and it's like amazing too to see the foresight that this man had in regards to like understanding like, hey, you can't strike, you can't catch lightning in a bottle twice, right? It's like it only happens once. So I'm never going to be able to replicate the same exact feeling that I did with the first one. We need to do something different. We need to go to a different uncharted territory. And we really did, honestly. Like there was so much similar and so much the same, but then so many new elements where, like we said, this isn't really a horror film. This is like an action suspense thriller, however you want to categorize it. I think it really falls more in that ballpark rather than in the traditional horror ballpark, whereas the first one did. And so I think, yeah, now that we know there are encampments of other people, we went a little bigger with this one. You could either go bigger, you could dial it back further, but I just think wherever we go next, I trust where this thing is going to go. I think that's the biggest part, sort of. If I'm going to speculate, it's going to be positive speculation. It's going to be more like, what if and how can they make it better? Not what if they could ruin it, It's
Right.
very different. And it's just because I think we've seen the progression, and it was very drastic. And now we're kind of knowing that there's going to be a third one. Krasinski's hinted at it a lot. He's clearly got the script written, as he said, and it's so wherever we go, I mean, if you want me to fantasize, I would like to go bigger, right? I would like to sort of see almost like an action combat style film where it's like the people rise up and they take back the world, because they figured out the frequency. Like, can they get out the message that Cillian Murphy and I'm forgetting her name, but
Millicent Simmonds.
Millicent Simmonds, can they get out the information of, hey, listen, there's a certain frequency that renders these things, sort of inept for a few seconds, and that's your moment to strike. When you can sort of open the head up, that's when you can do damage to them, and hey, you can do it without just a gun. You can get close enough if you have this certain frequency to even use just like a physical martial weapon, right? And so I think that would be really cool to sort of see, like, almost like a rebellion of the people sort of against their new rulers, sort of rise up in almost Chronicles of Riddick style, like just like insane. Like, we could go there. But the thing is, I don't think it'd be silly. Like, I think Chronicles of Riddick was silly, whereas, like, not that I've seen Mad Max, but from everything I've heard, it seems a little more realistic and believable.
The first two, I'll say. The first two. Not so much the third one. The first two, though. Okay.
So, but I think it could be a more grounded approach to something that sounds silly on paper because of Krasinski as a filmmaker. I don't know. That's where I'd like to go.
So let me just kind of bounce off that point. I'm going to throw down a couple things. I'm going to throw down a couple of other movie franchises that I can use as a comparison, both to where this could go in a good way and in a bad way, and also I think kind of where this movie franchise now has a chance to succeed where previous others that we've compared it to have failed, which is the John Wick movies. I think are a great example of like kind of. But, kind of as far as seeing the success that the Quiet Place movies now have seen, as far as them being original movies that play around with elements that we've seen in other movies, but are able to take them and play around with them in whole new different directions. What I don't want to happen, though, is what happened at the end of the last John Wick movie, which is where the last John Wick movie was awesome, but it did not at all feel like a finale, and the end just blatantly set up for the next one, because at that point it's like, oh, these movies make money, we're gonna keep going, and we're just gonna make 4, 5, 6 of these, and that is not what I want to happen here, because as much as I do enjoy, like, whenever you can churn out more, like, long-form franchises, the whole thing to me is that my favorite long-term, and again, I'm being completely selfish here, I'm not talking about, like, from a success standpoint, because I think if these movies get to a certain level of success, each of these will make money. My favorite long-form success movies have been movies that kind of stumbled at first and had to find their voice and didn't find their voice until like the 4th, 5th, 6th installment, like Fast and Furious as such, to give an example. I am not a fan of movies that find their voice, hit it strong going out of the gates, and then just try to chase that success, because that to me is an easy way to create for diminishing returns. I know these are bad examples. I'm just not a fan of horror, but I feel like the Friday the 13th and really all the horror franchises are a great example of this, where the initial installments, say what you will about each one of them subjectively, are pretty good and very well received, and then just as they continue to go on and on and on and on, it loses its luster, and that's not what I want to happen here. But apropos of that point, what I think could also happen here is where if Krasinski takes the right lessons and knows to walk away from the franchise at a certain point, even if the studio wants to keep churning out movies because this could continue to be a money pit, right, is he could have the chance to succeed where certain of those other franchises that we mentioned before that he was taking lessons from failed, because as we know, the Alien movies, first 2 movies great, then they just went off. They just dipped heavily with their next couple movies. Same thing with the Terminator movies. Terminator 3 is almost like even though it's not at all as bad as some other future sequels that would come out, Terminator 3 feels almost like a slap in the face compared to the first 2. And then the quality just got worse and worse and worse and worse. Literally to the point where when Dark Fate came out, people were just surprised that they were getting a good Terminator movie, as opposed to because we just had through 3 pieces of shit. I think that this could take the lessons from those franchises respectively and create for an absolutely banger 3rd installment that could be everything also that another franchise that had the chance to do a dope trilogy. And again, I haven't seen this, but you have, so you'll be able to comment on this more. Oh wait, no, you haven't, so you wouldn't be able to. Is the Matrix trilogy, where the first one was such a phenomenon that they rushed it so much so that Matrix 2 and but Matrix 2 and 3 came out in the same year. What is it, like May and November of 2003 or 2002, whatever year it was. That's insane. And then people wonder why those movies felt so rushed and so so it's really weird, because each trilogy has its own different thing going for it, right? And each franchise of movies definitely has a different thing going for it, but only because this franchise has predicated itself within certain areas of genre. I think that those are kind of like my fears of where it could go, but also my hopes for where it could go, if that makes any sense.
It makes 110% sense. I think that we are in a very interesting situation with this franchise, and it really just is going to be. It's almost like Krasinski's testing himself. That's right. Honestly,
which I love, because again, how many artists in the big budget theater going space get to do that with an original idea?
Yeah, this is like the ultimate gambit that he's running as a young filmmaker, and he's hedging all of his bets on one franchise out of the gates as like a young emerging director, and it's kind of incredible to watch. It's truly the most artistic and passionate thing I've seen in a very long time, and you really, I can't help but feel that there's no corporatism attached to this. There's nothing but really just passion and the want to improve and be better than the first outing. That's at least how I felt from the second one. So yeah, I think it's dangerous territory. I think the whole genre hopping thing has been done before and has failed. But I think, again, his ability to have so much soul of the first one in this is what kind of helped define it as a uniquely refreshing but familiar installment. Like, the dichotomy here is insane, and so at the risk of sort of further muddying and taking away clarity from how I feel going forward, I think I'll leave it at this. I feel confident.
Yeah, I do as well.
I think there's a chance that, as in anything, there's a chance that it can go wrong, but I do genuinely think that this is just a passion project. And so at the very least, I feel that even if the third one does fall shorter than the first 2, I'm going to guess not by much.
Yeah, I agree with that 110%. So with that being said, final star ratings?
Let's do it, man.
All right. So again, in ways that I was not at all expecting. This movie shocked me. This movie shocked me from an action standpoint. This movie shocked me from a horror standpoint. This movie shocked me from a visual standpoint. This movie shocked me from a filmmaking standpoint. And I have not been shocked and surprised by a movie in a long time, right? As far as this being like the third major installment, right, of the summer movie series that we're doing, right? Spiral was a very, very disappointing, even if we were able to get some fun out of it. And Army of the Dead, as much fun as that movie was, we still kind of like, in a sense, kind of knew what we were getting into as far as the Snyder of it all, and that being a return to a familiar place with Snyder. But I was not at all expecting for this movie to be good, right? As far as this being a movie that I was like kind of not dreading per se, but a movie that I was like, okay, this movie's been delayed so many times since the pandemic, started, you know, and I never really thought that. I'm like, okay, it's kind of gimmicky for this to be a sequel. This movie surprised me in every single sense. I was absolutely blown away. The tension was upped, the characterization was upped, the thrills were upped, just everything. It's everything that you wanted from a sequel to be upped while actually bringing something new to the table story-wise. So while I don't think necessarily that this is still getting to that 4.5 range, I definitely say that this is without a doubt one of my favorite experiences, and just one of my favorite movies of the year so far. This movie gets 4 out of 5 stars from me.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all those points. I think where your 4 out of 5 comes from slightly of a different perspective. My 4 out of 5, because it is a 4 out of 5 for me. I think it's just really the technicals and the passion and the emotion that this movie evokes in me overrides some of the because really my only pitfall was the character work and just the confusion there with Emily Blunt and just wanting to, okay, this is her moment to shine. How is she going to get by losing her husband? Loving that character already so much from the first one. I mean, she quite literally is like one of the strongest female characters we've seen in such a long time. She gave birth during a pandemic, during an apocalypse in a tub when she had to be quiet, the old school way. I mean, that's badass, man.
Yeah.
Like, that is insane. And, like, I just felt like we kind of dropped the ball with her just a little bit. But then, you know, as I've been doing this podcast, I've been thinking about it. Well, aren't her kids a testament to who she is as a person? And they're very strong and capable. And so because, like, you know, having this conversation, it was probably going to be about a 3.5 coming into it. But then realizing, like, you know, you are a reflection of your parents and your parents impart so much in you. I think, yeah, her character maybe was stronger in a different way, and it goes to that show don't tell. So if that's my only hang up and I can even justify it in a way that doesn't feel, you know, sort of half-assed at the end of a podcast, then I'm confident this is a 4.5. So
yeah, 4.5.
Oh, sorry, 4.5. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
4.5. Wow.
I meant 4 out of 5. I said 4.5, but you know, I need a second cup of coffee, it seems, before I go to work right now. But anyways, that's a me thing. Yeah. Speaking of, you know, me things, though, I'm half of a podcast, right, Dom? And
yes,
tell
indeed.
people about that.
Yes, people, thank you for tuning in to yet another episode of the Talkin TV podcast. Again, we're going to be podcasting just like we used to on Monday nights exclusively. We're going back to the old way of doing things all throughout the rest of the year. We've got our summer series of podcasts that we've been doing. Again, like we got to, we were kind of robbed of the chance to really do it in 2020 because of the pandemic, but we're back and in full force now. We're doing, oh man, what is it that we've got? Oh yeah, we've got Conjuring 3 next week. That's definitely going to be an interesting one. That's going to be a little bit of a new area for me, but continuing to exercise horror. You know, we've got In the Heights, Luca, and we're going to end June with F9. We've got We've got Black Widow, and so many more coming throughout the year. Oh man, just we've got so much to give you guys as far as the podcast goes, and that's just the podcast as far as that goes. We've got 4 more Fast and Furious first time watches this week. It's going to be the big one. F9 coming to you guys this Wednesday. It's going to be nuts. And then, of course, continue to tune in on Fridays for our variety stream. And Sunday nights for our Talkin' Thrones recap series. We're giving you guys as much content as we possibly can, given just our busy schedule, just everything going on in the world. But once again, be sure to click the subscribe button right there below. It's literally impossible to miss. I'm literally pointing right at it on this screen. You guys have no excuse to not click on it. Click on the subscribe button. Click on the bell next to it. That way you guys get notified every time we put up new content. Click the like button. Leave a comment. Just click everything that you see on the screen because it just helps us overall. It helps us that way we can continue to give you guys the content that it is that you deserve. And you can, of course, keep up to date with everything that we're doing if you follow us on our socials at Talkin' TV Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. Chris, where can the good people find you?
They can find me anywhere that matters, I would say, at Christian Evanko. Evanko spelled Evanko. I love being the TV nerd, but I'm not just the TV nerd. I make music, which you can find aptly through the link in my bio. It's I think they're good, and I think you guys would enjoy them. I feel like as passionate as Krasinski is about this franchise is how I feel about my music. And, it's not saying it lightly. I would never make a comparison that brash without meaning it. And I also have a second podcast called Talkin with Andrew and Chris. Talkin spelled the same way we spell our show here. It's a show about life, music, and everything in between. And you can find that as well in the links in my bio above and below if you're on Facebook. But anyways, Dom, speaking of Facebook, you have some social medias. Where can they find you?
I do. They can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Movie Karen. I'm just kidding. I'm not doing that. I just thought that was a little bit of a funny tidbit right there. At Movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook and Instagram, where you can find me posting shit occasionally for my daily life and mostly just posting movie news. It's pretty much just an outlet that I use to post movie news and occasionally like just random factoids overall. I don't like social media just in general as far as the effects that it has in society, but it's useful as far as our business goes. So if you want to follow me on my personal pages, you could do that there as far as that goes. And we'll see you guys next time on the next couple of episodes of just everything that we put out. You guys know when we put out stuff. 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.